Freeze! NYPD, drop it!
If suddenly made real, most video game characters would have some serious shell shock. Your average interactive protagonist can take a dozen bullets at once and kill hundreds of people over the course of a few in-game hours. Through them, we grapple onto fast-moving planes, crash every manner of vehicle, and participate in many a random act of mayhem. Anyone dealing with even a fraction of such action in real life is liable to suffer some serious trauma. The times games have actually had to deal with such issues have been rare, but moments of note do exist. Exhibit A, Max Payne.
There was nothing I could do. He was dead. I could tell by the empty, accusing stare of his eyes.
We meet Max Payne, the titular character of Remedy's noir shooter, just before the worst moment in his life. Some no-name thugs gun down his wife and infant child in the family home while high on the latest designer drug. The events initially play out as your standard inciting incident, motivating Max's vengeance in much the same way that punching someone's girlfriend sent them off into a side-scrolling rampage in the 80s. Back then, it was trite. In 2001, it was downright uncouth. But the double murder cripples Max psychologically, and we don't see the effects of this damage until much further down the road. For most of the game, Max's subconscious acts as a hint system of sorts, narrating the mission plan directly to the player along with camera cutaways and expository text boxes. But once the designer drug, known as Valkyr, starts to play a bigger role in the plot, the world takes a turn for the neurologically surreal. It wouldn't be the first time we shared a nightmare with Max, but our first glimpse into his head was definitely the most impactful.
The nightmare was always the same. Violent shapes moving in darkness, old and ugly. The killer's mad laughter was a riddle filled with wicked innuendo.
The prologue of Max Payne's second act, dubbed A Cold Day in Hell, takes place in Payne's demented memory. We begin in a darkened doorway, the gentle sounds of a child's mobile dominating the soundtrack. Max moves sluggishly, about halfway between his normal walking speed and the slow-motion movement of his bullet-time gunfights. The alcove ahead contains a broken mirror and a series of lockers. We guide Payne through a demented version of his home, along a series of bare hallways. His late wife weeps and begs in a disembodied voice for Max's forgiveness, as the hallways stretch and the camera hovers far behind him. We hear an infant's cry, faded, echoing in the background. Successfully navigating the maze of hallways brings Max to a living room. In a flash, a brief cutscene betrays his actual location, bloody and tied up in a chair as a man berates him off camera. Walking up the stairs causes Max to comment on the good old times depicted in the pictures of his family. A red haze coats the second floor of the building. As the player enters the bathroom, the glass wall of the shower shatters, and magically appearing planks of wood bar the door to the bedroom. Entering a door down the hallway changes the wallpaper to a pleasant cloudscape, a harsh red fog blocking the far view. At the end of the hall, the wallpaper becomes stained with blood. The only exit is a black void with a blood trail etched on the floor. Inside the void, the voices grow louder, the baby's cry and its mobile are sharper, while the threatening voice in the conscious world mutters nonsense threats. Tracing your steps along the blood trail, you come to another cloudscape hallway, another foggy red entrance in the distance. Running down the hallway brings you to the abundantly red bedroom of Max's infant daughter, face down and dead in her overturned crib. Max repeats his anguished line from the start of the game, and the child's wooden blocks spell out the word dead nearby.
No, please God, no.
The only door out leads to the last hallway, as dark and red as a photo development room. Racing through it prompts another cutscene of Payne tied up, the voice listing possible ways to murder him.
Slice him, dice him, shoot him full of holes, blow him to bits, vaporize him, disintegrate him. No matter what you do, they'll still be back good as new.
Nightmare Max speaks about his wife Michelle's diary. At the final door, we hear his wife's pleas from earlier repeat, and see Payne himself fatally shooting her off camera. The nightmare ends, and we return to the tied-up Max in the conscious world, the threat maker revealed as Frankie the Bat Niagara.
Niagara, as in you cry a lot? He had a baseball bat and I was tied to a chair. Pissing him off was the smart thing to do.
Dreams are one of the quickest ways to probe the depths of a character's mind. Just from these few minutes of gameplay, Remedy shoves players headlong into the tragedy playing out in Max's head. We may return to the subject of post-traumatic stress disorder as depicted in this series overall, but for this episode, our focus will be on this one nightmare in particular. This distorted flashback is a noteworthy effort, giving players a glimpse into a suffering mind through plays on dream logic and dream psychology. The increasing amounts of blood and blood-red light permeating the nightmare world characterizes Max's growing sense of danger as he moves through each room. Each new room checked without finding his endangered family increases Payne's sense of tension and desperation, clouding his recollection in an ever-increasing red haze. Max's slow speed hints at the dream state before the first cutscene can confirm it. We associate slowed running in dreams as emblematic of a lack of control. Max's sense of powerlessness, in and out of this defining trauma, is also evident in how he recalls the spaces around him in that moment. The distended, endless hallways could represent how the desperate father saw the relatively small distance he had to cover to reach his imperiled family. The distant camera indicates how small Max felt in this low moment, powerless in the knowledge he was probably too late. The empty void could be emblematic of a kind of focus. Once Max saw the trail of blood, likely assuming it to be of his family members, the rest of the world became irrelevant, and as such is not even being recalled in the memory. There are some things to contend with in Remedy's use of Max Payne's family here. Both Michelle and Rose serve as cross-generational women in refrigerators, extraneous female characters killed off expressly to motivate the male hero. The floating wooden blocks that spell out the word dead are also just as exploitative of a shocking child death as they are indicative of anything.
Please, God, no.
The subject of mental health is deeply important and exceedingly complicated and, sadly, a point too rarely discussed in video games. Given the combined body counts of some of the characters we've played as over the years, it's almost humorous that they continue in their line of work, or even as functioning human beings. It is understandable, however, from a design and production point of view, why we don't sit down too often in an action-adventure protagonist support group. Simulating the mental health of characters is a complicated, often boring, and usually risky task. No developer wants to be the first to come under fire from a health group for a poorly researched or misleading game mechanic. It could also be the simple need to keep momentum going. It would be hard to fit in any reasonable reactions to a gunfight when you need to get to the next campaign set piece. These subtle alterations to assets like wall textures and scene props recontextualizes the environment to Max's recollection of it, rather than what we already know to be its true conscious world version. Doorways we saw plainly in the game's opening were, to Max in that moment, shrouded in danger and foreboding. Objects we might have passed over without a second thought, like Michelle's diary, surged in prominence in Max's hindsight. It all builds to the conclusion that Payne believes himself so much to blame for his family's death that he might as well have pulled the trigger himself. Remedy's approach here in Max Payne was flawed but notable. By manifesting many tropes of dreams in mechanical form, slow movement speed, sudden changes in surroundings, distorted space, etc., they allow players to walk through a character's personal perspective of an event they had already played in a more traditional, removed fashion. Max the player avatar, for one level, becomes Max the trauma victim. It's not the perfect playable glimpse into a mind, but neither is the mind we're peeking into.
Nothing like that ever happens in the real world.